weaknesses and an environment primed for abuse are just some of the issues raised by the Auditor General in his report on the looting of government funds for COVID-19 relief. The temporary employment relief scheme, that's TERS, is just one of the initiatives that have been mismanaged, with illegal payments made to underaged people, the deceased, government workers and those already receiving social or student grants. Now, Business Leadership South Africa says President Cyril Ramaphosa must be supported in his hardline stance against corruption. Let's unpack this issue now. We're joined by the organization's CEO, Busi Mavuso. Busi, good morning. Thanks very much for your time on the AM report. I mean, so much analysis around what the AG had to say yesterday around the expenditure of funds meant to provide some relief to the most vulnerable in our country amid COVID-19, and how those funds have been mismanaged. And these were some of the warning calls that were issued when the President first announced that 500 billion rand relief package.
Absolutely, and I think you would remember that even when we went to the IMF to get the 70 billion rand loan that we got, the biggest concern from international interest and local interest was precisely that we hope that this money is not going to be stolen. And I guess unfortunately it has happened with the 500 billion rand. It's actually quite unfortunate, and the reason why we have actually stood strong in our support behind the President in calling for the corruption to actually be ended is precisely because we understand that the environment, is weak as it is, but his detractors who don't want the environment to in any way be strengthened are the ones who are actually, going against him in his tough stance and his tough call that he has actually made in as far as corruption is concerned. The UIF one is actually particularly an interesting one, Michelle, because when all of this started, business went to the department and requested to assist them in as far as strengthening their systems and strengthening their processes, because we were worried about the volumes that the UIF was going to have to deal with, and we were worried that there is no way that their systems are not actually going to be able to handle and deal with these huge numbers and volumes that they were actually going to be confronted with. And our proposal at no cost was actually rejected, as business. So I think it's all telling now why government didn't want business to intervene, precisely because the strengthening of the control environment, the strengthening of the processes, the strengthening of the systems was not going to allow the shenanigans that have taken place to actually happen. So this is the environment that we're operating within. This is, the kind of officials and leaders that we actually have, within government. That is why the ANC-NEC meeting that the President hosted over the weekend was actually a very difficult one, precisely because people want to continue the state capture project that was started 10 years ago, and they actually want to continue the looting spree with no, concern about the hardships that so many South Africans are currently facing during this crisis in particular.
I mean, you talk about the President's hardline stance on corruption, Busi, and that is just the thing. It's paying lip service to how we should be dealing with corruption in our country, but we're not seeing very much in terms of how those words are turning into action. You talk about business being denied the opportunity to go in and ensure that that money goes where it's intended. We've had various organizations on this show, not least of which the Quantity Surveyors Association of South Africa, also offering its services to government, specifically around infrastructure spend, so that we know the money we're spending is at least market related.
Absolutely. And I guess, let's agree that the President is actually finding himself in a very difficult situation, because he's clearly working within an environment that is not supportive of the decisions that is taken. But I think of his vision as well in terms of the direction that it actually like to take the country, and South Africa during this difficult time. So, but I guess there's going to have to be some form of hard line that is going to have to take to say that irrespective of how many people support my stance, I'm going to have to go ahead and accelerate some of these interventions that I need to put in place to try and deal with this issue of corruption in particular. Because this is actually bigger than this current crisis that we're facing, Michelle. What we are actually facing as a country is that those that could potentially be coming into the country to invest those that can actually be spending their foreign direct investment in the country are actually playing a waiting and see game. They'd like to see how we're going to manage this situation. They want to see what are some of the tough decisions and hard lines that we're actually going to be making as a country in terms of dealing with this minor 500 billion. Because I think if you look at the 500 billion stimulus package, it actually pales in comparison to the 3.4 trillion that we actually have to raise as a country in the next 3 years. So you can imagine, if we can't be trusted with 500 billion and 70 billion that we've just gotten from the IMF, how are we going to be able to raise the 3.4 trillion? And which investor would want to bring their 3.4 trillion into this environment whose controls are so weak, and the government that is actually fighting with the president in terms of when it tries to do the right thing, as it were. So the damage that is being created at the moment is actually one that is actually going to last with South Africa for quite some time to come. It is not just the current issue. It's actually an issue that is actually going to disadvantage us and actually put us at the back burner in our efforts of trying to reposition our country as an attractive investment destination. So the remnants are actually going to last with us beyond the COVID-19 crisis. And I don't know if we actually have that appreciation as the leadership in this country, and particularly as government, when we keep on pushing back and fighting the president, when it tries to do the right thing, during this critical time.
I mean, as you say, it's not just about the money that has been spent irregularly, have been stolen, to put it quite clearly. It's also about future investment into the country. It's about employment opportunities for the very many young people who are still without a job in our country. What do we need to happen now? Because the president, as you say, is saying the right things. We've got all these various organizations that are linked to the NPA, linked to the Hawks to deal with corruption. What has to happen next? And surely it must include arrests being made and money being recouped.
The president is really going to have to get the systems and the interventions that he has announced in motion. I don't think that he has the latitude and the luxury of trying to get everyone on his side. He's really going to have to go ahead and implement. I think now more than ever, he's going to have to understand that if you're going to try and change a country like South Africa with the corruption as endemic and as systemic like it is, there are people that you're going to upset in the process. But that is okay, because what you're doing is that which is going to try and put in a better position the 59 million South Africans. So I think for a moment, he's really going to have to suspend whatever political noises and the factional battles that he might be fighting within the ANC. Now is not the time for him to put the ANC first above South Africa Inc. I really think that is actually going to have to move on the things that he has announced and the interventions that he has actually announced, because if he tries to wait for his party to actually fully support him, then I'm afraid it's actually not going to happen. But he also has to realize that the damage that he actually could be doing, we know with him not acting at the moment, is actually a bigger damage than what we currently are seeing in front of our faces at the moment. So I think let's go ahead and implement, Michelle. We've been speaking about this for the past 3 years. It's actually getting stale, it's getting boring, it's getting redundant. I think this is really time for action.
Absolutely. Thanks very much for weighing in on this incredibly important discussion. Busi Mavuso is the CEO of Business Leadership South Africa.